Hello everyone, welcome to THLGK. Today we're going to talk about manipulation tools. Again, my naming sense, right? Manipulation tools, as the name suggests, are tools used to deceive, to manipulate us into believing, behaving, acting in a way that will usually benefit the people making use of them. I say usually because in the case of religion, religious operatives are such experts in this manipulation, in this indoctrination, we could call it, that the people they manage to deceive reproduce the very same arguments, positions. They basically are making use of manipulation tools without even realizing. It's a very perverse cycle. And it's interesting because even religious leaders might not know they are part of this cycle, that they are being manipulated themselves. Such is the strength, the power of the indoctrination to control the minds, to enslave the minds of most people. I was one of those people. One of those people that was manipulated by the religious discourse. And as I started to consider and question the religious discourse, the religious reality, these manipulation tools became easier to identify. Because the more you get in contact with the religious discourse, with an inquiring mind, the easier it is to realize when the religious operatives are trying to manipulate us, are trying to fulfill religious original and everlasting purpose, social control. And it's important to understand what religion is, because religions are groups of people that then develop into a hierarchical structure. And I call those who have a higher involvement with these structures, be they scholars, priests, pastors, someone position of leadership within a church, religious operatives. And the way I see it, they are the ones making use of these tools. And these tools, they can fall in many categories. You probably have heard of fallacies. And yes, all fallacies are manipulation tools. But not all manipulation tools are fallacies. Put a pin in that, because we'll get to future episodes where you see manipulation tools that are not even close to a fallacy. Authority, however, can be considered a fallacy. You can even search it online and you find definitions for it. And that's exactly what we are going to talk about today. authority can be used as a manipulation tool, can be a fallacy. And it's a very important distinction here, because not all uses of authority means it's a manipulation tool or it's a fallacy. But when authority is used as a replacement for the argument, so the figure making the argument, the institution saying something, they are more important than the argument itself, than what they say itself. That's when authority becomes a manipulation tool. Because the way I see it, all that matters is the argument, is the evidence. And those must stand regardless of who is saying them, who is proposing them, who is defending them. So it doesn't matter if a person is the most qualified, the most awarded person, expert on a subject. What matters is the argument, the evidence they are presenting, can those stand by themselves? That's what's important. And in the religious context, there is even something that makes it all worse, because since childhood, those who grow up in religion are trained to accept varying degrees of authority. I mean, we are already trained on our non-religious lives. So the authority of the parent, the authority of the teacher, and so on. But in religion, I think this is much stronger. Because they want the figure standing on top of them, in front of them, to have this psychologically higher position in the minds of the audiences. Because what they say needs to carry truth, fact, reality within the scope of their narrative, of course. That's not how reality is. That's why it's a manipulation. Because when they make people believe this sort of proposition, it's much easier to control them. That's why it's easily abused. So, authority, as I said, it isn't intrinsically negative. Our parents' authority, our authority in school, especially when we are growing up. Because theoretically, as we develop from babies to toddlers to children to teenagers, finally to adults, we should have been able to develop the ability to understand arguments and operate on our own without the need of this authority that's helpful growing up. or should be. Again, it's easily abused. However, when it comes to religion, there is no growing up. You are children forever. And to keep us like that, they must resort to these manipulation tools. So they keep the audiences infantilized, dependent. Like kids, we should just accept what they are saying and not question. And going back to the episode about the abominable approach, because that's where religion operates. That's why I use the abominable approach interchangeably with religious approach, or even religion itself. Manipulation, deceit, lies are a must. And once you start noticing this, it gets clear that authority is one of the most commonly used manipulation tools. And of course, it has a varying degree of complexity. So when it comes to religion, the way I see it, there will be basically three main ways authority manifests. We could have overt authority, absolute authority, and finally, the hardest to identify and explain, covert authority. Overt authority is very straightforward and is among the most commonly used forms of authority as a manipulation tool. As we said before, this is the form that basically calls us stupid children and demand our obedience and acceptance of everything they say. Why? Because they are the ones saying it. Again, this is the problem. If they were to make good, honest arguments, it would be okay. But because they can't, they have to make use of manipulation of these tools. These tools only exist in the absence of good arguments. Whenever I think about this, there's a very good Joe Rogan Experience podcast on which Dave Smith and Douglas Murray have a debate. If, and here's the most important aspect, if you manage to put aside the content of the discussion, which is very charged, I admit that, and instead analyze the construction of the arguments, it gets clear pretty fast that we have one side making use of arguments and the other employing manipulation arguments, authority chief among them. And again, it doesn't matter for the context of this episode what they were discussing. Doesn't matter what side you're on. We are talking about the structure, the construction of the arguments, the construction of their logical narratives. And one isn't flawed because it's defending or it's against it, but because it makes use of these manipulation arguments. Or should I say, these manipulation tools as arguments. So if you are ever interested, you should check that out, because in my opinion, it's very clear the moments that happen. Because, look, manipulation tools, they are not exclusive for religion. You can easily spot them in politics. That's understandable because religion is politics, and politics has been infected by religion, so of course they have a very close relationship. And learning to spot this should be our, how could I say, objective, our endeavor, because it helps us identify when someone is making an argument or when someone is using a manipulation tool, in this case authority, because they don't have arguments that are good enough. And that can help us immunize ourselves against these types of manipulation attempts. And notice, I'm not even saying, in this particular example, who is making use of arguments, who's making use of manipulation tools. This is something you should do for yourself. If you are interested, you should try and find out for yourselves. Because again, what matters is the structure of the argument, not the person saying it. And that's how overt authority works. When someone says, for instance, that you must be an expert to talk about something, even to be taken seriously, or that the argument is valid because of the person making it, it's authority can be used both as an attack or as a defense tool. When you say, oh, you need to be an expert to talk about this, to be taken serious about this, it's attacking you. When it says, oh, but the argument isn't valid because of the person saying it, it's basically defending it. It's a very what's the word? It's a very viable manipulation tool for both positions. And I could say they are very connected. Overt authority is very connected to our next aspect, our next use of authority as a manipulation tool, what I call absolute authority. Absolute authority. It's very straightforward, and again, it's very overt. But I make them fall in different categories because Absolute authority makes use of an ultimate source of authority, basically to shut up someone, to end an argument, to justify something that cannot be questioned. And again, this can be used both in a religious setting and a political one. For instance, in a religious discussion, because God said. Who are you to go against God? Who do you think you are to know something more than God Himself? It's an authority that cannot be questioned. For Catholics, for instance, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church says this, and it's basically final. Are you going against the Catholic Church? If you are a believer, it's very hard to argue against this form of authority, of absolute authority. Because you buy the premise God is real. You buy the premise He holds supreme authority, supreme knowledge. So, whatever He says, it cannot be argued against. And yet, if you are not a believer, then it doesn't work on you. If you are an atheist, if you are from a different faith, it doesn't work. But for someone that are a part of that tradition, of that religion, it works really well. And look, I'm not even arguing here from a point that everything is social control or God doesn't exist. It doesn't even matter to this argument. We should even assume, oh, God is real and He is a supreme being. But if you are a believer, what you should consider, what you should notice, and that's why I say this is a manipulation tool, this is absolute authority, it's because it's never God telling you, it's always another person or an institution. God says, it comes from God. This is what God wants. It's never God telling you. It's always someone else. Even the Bible itself, you have to trust other people. Because the Bible are books written by people. And those people are telling you what God said, did, and so on. So, okay, you are a believer. You don't want to stop believing. Fine, but try to be on alert. See if what's being told in the name of God will truly benefit you, or you benefit the person telling you in the name of God. Of course, this doesn't work for people who doesn't buy the tradition. Right? The moment you become an atheist, how do you care about what God says? It doesn't matter. But for instance, people who don't believe in God have a tendency to fall for the other side, for the political side. Here's where the idea of consensus can also be used as an absolute authority, as a manipulation tool. In a more scientific-oriented perspective, consensus can work really well. And again, it's the same as God. It means nothing by itself. Consensus, it means nothing by itself because they are people. And the one thing we know, this is a fact. Oh, I'm not even claiming as opinion. I'm saying this is a fact. Humans make mistake. Humans make mistakes. It's not singular, it's plural. And we make mistakes until the day we die. Yes, the idea of consensus helps us control for the individual mistakes. It's part of the scientific process. But consensus can be corrupted because humans can be corrupted. And it returns to what I said previously. You heard something about consensus? What matters is the argument. What is the consensus? What's the argument sustaining the consensus? Be using as a foundation for this conclusion the consensus is presented. This is what matters. This is always what matters. Because scientific consensus has been wrong more than once. And I won't say much here today, but 2019, 2020 is a date where we know where consensus failed, isn't it? Now the consensus is that the consensus was wrong. Isn't that interesting? Finally, we get to the last manifestation of authority as a manipulation tool, what I call covert authority. As the name suggests, it's a hidden form of authority being used as a manipulation tool. Unlike the overt authority, which is very much on our faces, with calls for expertise, or because this expert said this, and many other ways, and absolute authority, which goes to the supreme forms an authority can take. Covert authority is subtle. It's hidden within the narrative. It's not thrown at our faces. The way I see it is like they are creating a framework in our minds to lead us to lower our guards and accept what they say. I will give you an example. Imagine you're going to listen to a podcast and the guest is a biologist. And the host asks a question. What about the formation of life? Do we have evidence for creationism? And the scientist goes, well, as a biologist, and proceeds to reply. There was already two ways authority was used in a covert manner. The second one was when, in the reply, they made sure to mention as a biologist. Because, the framework is being set. You will expect a biological answer to the question. But they will give you a theological answer masquerading as a biological. That's why it's a case by case. Because you have to analyze the arguments themselves and see what's happening. The first case was when, before you even watched the episode, you came into contact with what the person was. A biologist, a PhD, a postdoc, whatever the titles are. Again, by itself, it doesn't mean it's authority as a manipulation tool. That's why this is a very difficult to spot manipulation. Because it's only within their narrative that we will be able to identify if that person is making use of their expertise, of their titles, of their area of knowledge to present real arguments, or to present arguments masquerading. And since we're talking in a theological context, masquerading as science but having a core completely theological. This happened, I believe, for two reasons. The first one is that religion in the West lost real authority. So they had to start making use of this manipulation tool, make use of these manipulation tools to continue their existence. I do think that before they still used them. I mean, absolute authority is one that has been used for thousands of years. But as science gained influence, religion lost it. So they had to come up with these measures. And again, they are always reactive. So since now, we have been very suspicious of experts, of figures of authority. They've been masquerading authority, but following the very same old playbook. Because, which is the most important thing of this episode, when the argument is less important than the person, institution, than the authority behind it, then it's a manipulation tool. And the second reason is because we are ignorant. And what I mean by that is, we might be knowledgeable on a field or a few of them, but when it comes to everything, there is a lot we don't know about. And because we don't know about, and sometimes we get curious, we want to learn something, we tend to look for those who have spent years in those areas. But religion has infiltrated, religious operatives have infiltrated all areas. That's why we always have to pay attention. And again, not to the person making the arguments, presenting the evidence, but to the arguments and evidence themselves, because I believe that from now, covert authority will probably supersede both overt and absolute in its usage. Both will still have their places within this larger manipulation game, as I call it. But I do believe that must be redouble, triple, whatever we can do to guard ourselves against this very subtle, hidden form of authority as a manipulation tool, in which, without realizing, we are no longer giving credit to the argument, but to the hidden, usually, as in the example, framework around it, and then we end up falling for their traps. Finally, why present authority as a manipulation tool? Because religious stories are the same as Santa Claus. Something humans use to control people. We all know this. If you are not a good kid, you won't get a present. It doesn't get clearer than that. You control the behavior of children through this narrative of this being who gifts them something they want on Christmas. But Santa usually is outgrown and then completely ignored. Just try to tell at 20 years old, at 30 years old, that you won't get a present from Santa, of course, because you are being a bad person. How do you expect they will react? How you will react if someone were to tell you that? Yes, you wouldn't care at all. In fact, you think that person was crazy. But with religion, the same structural narratives, they don't lose their effectiveness. Even when we grow old. In fact, the older we get, the more we double down. And why is that? Because of the use of these manipulation tools. The existence of authority as a manipulation tool doesn't mean every authority figure, every argument in which some sort of authority appears is bad, wrong, or in fact a manipulation tool. But when authority supersedes, becomes more important, and in a lot of cases replace the argument, that's when it's a manipulation tool. Because you see, it's never enough when you start using authority as a manipulation tool. In a discussion, you could go like this. Oh, you only have a bachelor's? That's not good enough. You don't even have a master's. And then you go and you get your master's. And then you come back to make the argument. Oh, you got a master's? Poor thing. You don't even have a PhD. What do you think you know? And you go and you study 4 more years. You get a PhD and? Is that enough? Oh, silly you. You don't even have postdoc. This is the point. Notice that I didn't even mention the argument you made, because it doesn't matter. When it comes to authority as a manipulation tool, what you are saying doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter how many acolytes you get. You could even be the top of the top. You could get a Nobel. It doesn't matter. Because if you reach the pinnacle and you are recognized worldwide, either the world is stupid for recognizing you, or they simply move on for another manipulation tool, making the whole thing completely pointless. Because again, your argument isn't addressed. Your argument is irrelevant. In fact, by using manipulation tool, they are showing that your argument has all the relevance. But because their objective is to deflect from it, then authority is used. As long as you don't agree with them, it doesn't matter how many PhDs, postdocs, Nobel Prizes you have. It's all worthless because they were worthless from the beginning. And remember this, when they use authority, when they make use of the exact same things, then it's all that matters. And look, I don't think the expert class should be ignored or dismissed. In fact, I make use of them a lot in my videos. I rely on them. I'm going to say, oh, they say this is a fact. Of course, I'm making use of the expert class. But I'm making use of the product and of their research, and that's what should be judged, not the person saying it. Who cares? In fact, who cares if it's an expert making a point? If the arguments are valid, if they are sound, if they stand on their own, it could be the most illiterate person on earth. It doesn't matter, because what matters are the arguments themselves. And let me give you, to finalize, a theological example. In exegesis, which is the literary analysis of a text, there is a very interesting movement. When the researcher is religious, and most of them are, but a lot of them aren't, so they are experts. If you're going to read the books, the articles, the methodological part of it, the scientific part of it, tends to be really good. But when you get to the conclusions, it's like they do a 180, and whatever they produce, they put on a shelf, and then they come back saying the exact same things before whatever they researched. You see that a lot. or you see selective application of the results of their own research, so it doesn't contradict something from religion. And that's why we must always pay attention to the methodology they use, to the scientific process itself, to the logical framework in which the research is presented. And thus, while experts should always be considered, they should never be trusted. No one should ever be trusted. The arguments are what must stand regardless of whoever is making them. Because when someone focuses on the person, on the institution, on the book, on the divinity, you can be sure, almost always, if not always, when the focus is not on an argument, always, that the argument itself is not able to stand on its own. So they need to add this authority layer to manipulate us into believing what they want, which, as I always say, is your right. That's it, everyone. Thank you all for watching. I hope you managed to learn something today. And if you found something I said interesting, my advice is always go look it up for yourselves. Don't trust me. And check it out for yourselves, because when you think for yourself, you protect yourself from being manipulated by other people. If you like, please consider liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, sharing it. Check X. I'm posting articles there as companions to the videos. And as always, thank you for your support, and I see you all next time.